were an amazing band, but they were they were not concentrating on albums. Like they would have great singles, but they didn't, you know, there would be stuff on albums that wasn't maybe as well groomed as on Beatles. I mean, everything on the Beatles album was, you know, you could either like it or not like it, but you knew they had spent a lot of time on it. It was very intentional, you know. Stones for me seem sometimes a little, you know, filler on some of the earlier albums.
Right. Well, we are now live. So they got a little glimpse of what we were talking about.
Hello, everyone.
I'm here with Phideaux. I met you back at 3RP.
Right.
Yep. But before then, you were sending me your CDs. The first one, you know, was Phideaux.
Correct.
And I was like going, well, I didn't heard of it before, you know, and I was getting a lot of variety of stuff early on. And so it was kind of nice to get something that was kind of outside the box. And I think you wrote in the thing, you were saying, I'm not sure if this is going to fit your criteria or not. And I go, well, you know, I think progressive music is kind of like a very wide genre, you know, a lot of different things can fit into it. And I thought that it fit, you know.
I'm glad. I mean, you know, I certainly grew up listening to what would be known as progressive rock, but it also included psychedelic rock, and then later on, you know, glam rock and post rock, you know, as we got into the 1980s, and certainly the energy of punk rock, and that fueled a lot of sort of the minimalist Susie and the Banshees, Joy Division stuff of the 80s. And I feel like all of it is creative music. You know, for me, I like creativity in music and unusual solutions to the problem. But that doesn't mean I don't like, you know, shorter pieces or more, you know, pop oriented stuff. I guess it just depends, you know, on where you draw the line. You know, top 40 is one thing, but then Susie and the Banshees or The Cure is a totally different thing, you know.
Right. Yeah. I was watching
music, you know, Roxy Music Stranded, you know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was watching a lot of things on YouTube where they, you know, because I kind of, as I'm getting older, I'm a little more open-minded towards different things than I was 30, 40 years ago, you know, and when I, you know, just a certain genre and I stuck with it and didn't look outside of anything that, you know, if it didn't belong, you know, I didn't care about it. And now I'm caring about it, and it's like all these different styles, you know, it's just amazing. And it's like, that's what I think I like about your music is you're not following a lot of the traditional progressive rock music like a lot of them are. You know, they seem to be like, you know, you can pinpoint on certain bands their influence, you know, their exact influences, and sometimes the way they play their music, you go, okay, well, that's from Genesis, or that's from, you know, ELP, or
Sure.
you know,
yeah.
And I think yours the kind of music that doesn't really fall into that. You know,
Well, I'm glad.
I mean, over the years, I mean, that's what, I mean, you go up to, I mean, we had the Ghost Story, which I kind of thought it felt continued the style of Fiendish in a way. And then you got to the Chupacabras. I mean, I was listening to this the other day, and it's just kind of interesting having a 20-minute song about the Chupacabras.
Yeah, that was my first stab at true prog rock, you know, like I of course grew up with Supper's Ready and Thick as a Brick and long songs of the Beatles, Abbey Road Side 2, which was a great long suite of songs. So I definitely like the idea of a wider, larger canvas. But I also loved David Bowie, loved stuff that was quirky but shorter
Right.
pieces. So, and I think my first couple of albums, I didn't really know that there was I didn't know there was an audience for progressive rock again. And
Right.
that's what I kind of discovered. And that's what led me to Chupacabra, because I was listening at that time to a lot of Italian progressive rock that I had never heard of before. And
Right.
there was a band called oh damn, I'm gonna mangle their name, so I'm not even gonna say it. But there was a very piano-based Italian band that had made an album in 1977 that was gorgeous and beautiful and very piano centric. And I had just gotten a piano and was trying to learn how to play it. And that's when I wrote Chupacabra, while trying to learn the piano in the style of this band.
Yeah, that song is like, I just like how the story is where it's, your vocals and then Valerie's, it's like it almost like it was, and maybe I got this wrong, kind of two different points of view, or the different
Uh,
side of the Chupacabra,
yeah, I mean, definitely, it's two points of view of looking at the, what does the creature think he's doing? What is the creature doing? What is we always considered Valerie to be sort of the voice of, conscience, or the greater the outside view of the Chupacabra, whereas most of what I sing is from the point of view of the creature, who thinks it is doing God's work.
right,
um, and of course it's the same exact idea as Marillion doing Grendel, which is of course
right.
based on a novel taking Beowulf from the creature's point of view. So that was, and I had been reading a lot about Chupacabra at the time, and so I thought, oh, this would be a good story to tell. And it was really the first time I involved Valerie a lot. Valerie had always been someone, we played in a band previously where she was basically the lead singer, and then I made my own music, and so I was involving her to the degree where she would, do some extra vocals in the chorus or whatnot. But this was the first real song where I put specifically placed a part for her only to sing. So that
Right.
was nice in Chupacabra.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like all those, the English progressive bands, they told mythologies from their area, and then now you're telling that, from the American continent, you're telling a mythological creature, so it's kind of, it was almost like, oh, here's the American monster. You guys dealt with Grendel.
Right.
Here's, you know, here's the chupacabras.
Exactly.
And this. When I first got this, I used to play it to death. I mean, each of the songs. I mean, the ruffian. It's like it's at one time I put the two of those ruffian songs back to back, and it's like they fit pretty good. I
Yeah.
mean, it was, it just, it was all of a sudden, I mean, you have on that album, you have the long epic progressive rock, and then that Return of the Ruffian, it has that punk, angst going for it, so it's like you got two different sides of, uh, that were, it was kind of cool. I mean, I'm sure some purist would have been like, why'd you do that?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Like,
the truth of the matter is that Ghost Story was recorded in 1996 and never finished. And then I spent a lot of time not making any music. And then in 2001, I started making music again and wrote Fiendish and Chupacabra. And I recorded the Fiendish album, including Chupacabra, but Chupacabra wasn't close enough to being finished. And also I was concerned about having a 20-minute song on what would essentially be my first album. But once I finished Fiendish, then I had more confidence to finish Ghost Story. So I went back to those old tapes, figured out what was lacking in them, finished it. But within Ghost Story, there had been the Ruffian on the Stairs 3 songs that had been recorded way earlier than Fiendish. So Chupacabra then was created from songs that were recorded for either Ghost Story or Fiendish, but never finished. And so then that's why Chupacabra has such an unusual quality to it. And very often, every couple of years, I make an album that's comprised of tracks from previous albums. I have a couple of those waiting to be finished right now that would sweep up tracks from the Doomsday #7 era and also from the Infernal era.
Right. Yeah, I could, that, and then you went on to, you did the 313.
Yes.
Kind of, in a way, kind of goes a little bit more with the first 2.
Yeah, and 313 was a way to sweep away everything that had come before it, because all the first 2 albums, Ghost Story and Fiendish, and by extension Chupacabra, were just basically me and a drummer and just making music that was built in the recording studio. And 313 was an attempt to bring all the people that I had played with together in one studio for one day and see what we would come up with. And it took place on 3/13, March 13th. And we tried to make an album. It didn't end up working out that way. I took time afterwards to gussy it up, but it was the first time we had a lot of people playing in the studio all together. And then of course, after that, with that album, because when you're making something up in one day, it can't be very deep. So it was by necessity just a bit of a lark. And then I spent a couple months writing new music with my drummer, which resulted in the beginnings of Doomsday Afternoon and The Great Leap.
Yeah,
exactly. And we wrote and recorded Great Leap and Doomsday Afternoon basically at the same time, but then finished Great Leap first and took more time to get the orchestration ready for Doomsday Afternoon. So that's why how those came out a year apart.
Right. And at that time, this was around the time that you played at that 3RP festival.
Well,
right?
we played at 3RP right after we made #7.
Oh, okay,
So-
okay.
So that was like 2009, I think. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember, when it was like my first festival since moving out east. And I was like, "Man, this is gonna be cool." There's a lot of bands that I've only conversed with online at the time, and now I get to see them in person. And it's like, it was kind of wish they had someone there to, professionally film it, because I thought it was a really good festival.
Yeah.
All the choices that they brought, all these bands, they were different, but then they kind of fit with each other in a way.
Yeah, no, it was a good lineup. I remember really enjoying IQ and also what's the band from down south? I can't remember.
Glass Hammer.
Glass Hammer, yeah.
Yeah.
They were great too. And of
And
course,
then-
King's X,
King's X, yeah, and then Persephone's Dream was kind of more, went into the more mystical, because I like that set,
Yeah, they were good. They look good too.
Yeah, I thought it was one of the better lineups that I've seen at a festival at that point. It's almost like someone was just saying, okay, we need them to be different, but not so terribly different that it's like, you're gonna scare away people, that's,
Sure.
I mean, that's the one thing. There's some festivals that they just stick bands exactly the same, one after another, and it's like there's no variety to it. I like something where it's like, you get different feelings from the band, you know, and oh, Mark's in the room.
Oh, hello.
Um, yeah, he went at a point. I think I think you were on the verge of getting into where widespread knowledge, you know, people were finding out about you at that point. You know, once you started Great Leap and Doomsday, you know, I think when Doomsday came out, more people were talking about you, and I was like, oh, this is good. I mean, because you know, known about you for years prior to that, and I'm like,
Ah,
well, you know, it's like, hey, you know, I'm glad to see people finally getting on the bandwagon to see, you know, what great music you put out.
oh, thank you.
And let me see.
Mark was very helpful in that regard as well. He's always been very supportive. Both Mark and Raina have, I think, been at every show we've ever played. Maybe one they didn't come to, but they've surprised us. There's been many times I've gone backstage and there's a visitor and it's Mark and Raina, which is always wonderful.
Oh yeah, you know, he goes,
Not to
that's
mention,
me.
not to mention playing at their house, you know.
I've heard of all their shows that they do there, and it's like, oh, so for me, it's so far away, but it's nice that they have that offering, you know,
Oh yeah.
because you know it's nice to play in a big crowd, but then I think it's also and put words into a musician's mouth that it's more intimate. You know, you get the energies off the audience a lot easier than if you're, you know, in thousands and thousands of people. You know, you can't really, you kind of feel it, but you know, at least in a small crowd, you feel it better.
Well, yeah, and you're much more nakedly exposed. You can't really fake it as much when you're, you know, 3 feet away from the audience.
Right, right. Yeah, it's like, you know, okay, I gotta give them the best show I can do, you know.
Yeah.
And then you did snow torch. I kind of like
Correct.
the packaging on this one where it's like a mini LP.
Yeah. I love mini LPs and I collect them. I have a lot. I have, you know, any album that I could possibly get in mini LP version, I do have. And so I have decided from this point forward to definitely always put my albums out in that format if possible.
Well, it gives the character to it too, you know. And it's like, you know, like with this one, Inferno, you know, you just open it up and it's, you know, basically a mini LP.
Yeah.
And I mean, granted, you got to take extra good care of them as opposed to a jewel case. But
You can always replace the jewel case. That's true. Yeah.
yeah, so it's like I always put them into those little plastic sleeves, and you know, got a whole bunch of those. So I'd, you know, go through, and every time I would get an album that has, you know, that's done like that, or a digibook, or you know, whatever, you know, I put it in there, you know, because I want to make sure it's protected.
Yeah.
Because if it gets damaged, you know, it's like, oh well, you know, the only other thing to do is hope that it's still in print, that you could buy a replacement copy, you know, because
I left my vinyl collection in New York City when I moved to Los Angeles, and I had a friend of mine staying in my New York apartment, and she had a cat, and that cat destroyed like a lot of my vinyl LPs, all my early Genesis, and yes, I had to try to get new versions of them, you know.
all right. That's it. That's the other thing is I gotta tell everybody, you know, I'm very much a physical media person. I mean, I like to have everything on a CD. You know, I don't have the room for vinyl, you know, in my apartment, so CDs is the next best thing for me. I never really got into digital only albums. You know, because I'm always afraid. I know you can back them up onto a cloud, but what if something happens to that cloud? It's gone. Because, I mean, that's the worst case scenario. It's gone. So at least when you have a CD or an album, you know, you got the hard copy. You can, if your computer crashes with all your music, there's your backup. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there's, people listen to music and it's convenient to have it streaming or on a pod or a pad of some sort. But I mean, when I was a child and collecting music, the communication from the artist was a full package. It involved a cover and the songs and the lyrics, and very often as music became more unique, it wasn't just 3.5 minute, pop songs with repetitive words. And so people would make an effort to create a whole world to step into. The first stuff I ever saw was my sister's Beatles albums when I was a very small kid, and opening up Magical Mystery Tour, which had a booklet and weird pictures, and that was magic to me. So for me, and by extension, Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick with the newspaper. I mean, all of album covers were a really important part. So for me, album artwork is an important thing, and that's why I like physical as well.
Yeah, because like you said, it actually transport. Not you put on your headphones, you sit back, you listen to the music. Have that. If you have a record, you have the big booklet to look at, or the CD, and you just get transported to whatever fantasy world the person the band
Yeah.
puts out, and you escape for that. When albums were 45 minutes, you escape for 45 minutes. Now it's like, you can escape for almost an hour, little over an hour now. So it's like, that's what I love about music, is that escapism. It's
Yeah.
like,
And it
and I
travels
think
with
when
you.
yeah, and like places, you're saying streaming like Spotify, I think that disrupts that fantasy, because now you can just only go to the individual songs, and I noticed, and you noticed too, with progressive rock music, unless they went full pop like Genesis did in the 80s, you're not going to have a song that just ends and then a new one starts. A lot of them kind of flow into each other, so you need to have the full album to appreciate. And I think streaming takes that away and doesn't allow, I think, the younger audience that experience that we had. you know
Not to mention when, if I rip a CD to listen to in the car, on a thumb drive, and
right.
let's say I put 5 albums on a thumb drive. Well, the songs normally will be often stack up in alphabetical order. So then you have to, like, okay, well, let me put put the number in front of the title so that I know what order the song comes in, because an album is often sequenced in a very specific way, where you want this song works well after that song but sounds awful juxtaposed against this song. So yeah.
Yeah, that's, and it's like, I understand nowadays people want quick access to their media, whether it's music or movies. They want quick access to it and streaming. um and I always see, like, um the pros and cons of places like Spotify. I see that all the time on Facebook, where people are, arguing for it, arguing against it. It's like they both have very good, valid points. And one of the most valid on the con side is what the artist gets each stream. They would have to do millions and millions of streams from that one song for it to actually, get any kind of revenue.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's I see a lot of people who are like that. And then I see people, and I'm kind of in somewhere in the middle. I use it when someone tells me about an album that I never heard of the band before, I go and check it out first to make sure that when I go buy it, I'm not going to be disappointed. I'm going to be able to enjoy the music. And I've had a lot of people. I mean, I check YouTube,
Yeah,
because
YouTube's great for that too.
um, I've had during the pandemic. I mean, I've discovered bands that I never heard of before, and then bands that I overlooked the first time around, when they came out. So it's like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask. I mean, how did, music wise, how did you cope during,
During lockdown?
mhm,
Well, I work on a television show, and
yeah,
we were shut down in March, right when pretty much the rest of the world was shut down. And I have lived both in Los Angeles and New York City, and in New York City, all of my archives exist. So all the ancient recordings that I've ever done when I was 14, 15 through 28 are in New York City. And I started deciding during the beginning of lockdown that I wanted to kind of organize my archives. And so I got my sister to send me a bunch of tapes of my earliest work. And I set about trying to digitize that stuff and organize it. So for me, having the lockdown was pretty nice because it gave me an opportunity to be very, very, very self-indulgent. Then I went back to work about 4 or 5 months later, and unfortunately, I did not get access to the original tapes. My sister had cassettes of all my original stuff, so I wasn't that excited by the sound quality. So when I finally was able to get back to New York City, which was only this past summer, I took my original reel-to-reel tapes and sent them to a studio to bake them and digitize them. So I'm ultimately going to be working on a project to organize my archives, but then I also have several albums that I need to finish. It's been a bit of a problem for me to find someone who I trust to mix my music, and I'm just about getting that worked out. So I'm really hopeful that I'm going to finally release some stuff. But during the lockdown, I was also privileged enough to be able to continue to work in this recording studio with my producer Paul Russler, and we've been working on a lot of stuff. So I had an incredibly creative time. I regret that I am really unable to share that with people at this point because I just have so much stuff that's on the cusp of coming out. And of course, I had the opportunity to perform at Prague Stock this past October with Steve Unruh and my friends
yes,
Valerie and Ariel. And we essentially recreated a house concert we had done at Mark's. So I was also rehearsing for that during the last, several months, which has been when I'm working on towards a performance, it's hard for me to finish up recordings because I do have a very absorbing day job, which is working on television soap operas, so yeah, but creatively it was a great time. I mean, I predict, I have high hopes that in the next year there's going to be a lot of this music that I've been working on coming out, and that's what I'm really looking forward to. The next 5 to 10 years being about getting my albums back in print, finishing live mixes of live concerts we've done, getting my newer albums ready to release, and then working on my archives and a book about my music and where I've come from and where I'm going. So it's a good time for me to lockdown was a good time for me to really take stock, and I enjoyed that process.
yeah. I've noticed, just people that just dove right into their creative, if not recording, they were, constructing the songs, arranging and everything, and getting everything, one guy that I was talking to, he learned how to mix and master his music. So it's like, he said before the lockdown, he said, I didn't have time. I didn't have time for that,
Right.
now. So it's like a lot of people took advantage of it, learn something new, or in your case, dive into, archives, that probably if you didn't have the lockdown, you probably wouldn't have gone to because, you'd be busy with, the most of the newer stuff.
Yeah.
So and there's, and then there's some I've talked to that basically just put it over there and, when, when we're out of it, I'll pick up where we left off,
Yeah.
and so it's, I guess it's a personal thing. I mean, if I was a musician, I think I would have done what that one guy was, I'm not sure, if you know him, Robert Berry,
Yeah.
that he learned how to mix and master. I think I would have done something like that,
Sure.
and
Sure.
maybe even learn a new instrument. You got that time, you got the time, so it's like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's never enough time for anything, I just, when I relish the time before me, something comes up to occupy it. But yeah, I mean, I also did on Bandcamp put out a release of some weird bits and pieces that either from my archives or even one song that was new that I was working on went onto that kind of release that I did on Bandcamp, which I think you can get for free. So if people want to hear weird odds and sods of my more recent stuff, go to Bandcamp and there's some freely downloadable things.
and the name, what was the name of that one? It had an interesting name to it.
Did have an interesting name. I can't remember. It was called, I don't know. You used it as the picture on the cover.
Yeah,
Was it was
something
yeah.
burnt offerings.
Yes. Something along the lines of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I when I saw that, I was like going, oh, he's got a new one, and then I looked at it and I said, I recognized some of the titles from, previous ones. So it's like, I think kind of in the way is that a little bit kind of how what Chupacabra, the album where it had pieces from different times,
Well, Chupacabra was cleaning up songs that I really liked, but that they just didn't finish. They just didn't fit on the first two things. Whatever the burnt embers, burnt offerings thing was just in going through my archives, I discovered a lot of things that I thought were interesting, and I thought, oh, gosh, people might like to hear some of this. So, and the only way you can really show it to people is to upload it somewhere. And I wasn't, I don't really have a video capacity. So I didn't want to upload it to YouTube. And I thought, well, if I make a Bandcamp release, I can link that to Facebook and, put the songs, one at a, and for a while I was putting individual songs up, and then I decided to gather it together. So it was a bit more of a weird, it's more like what would be in a box set or as a bonus disc on a reissue, not really an album in and of its own. Although there was a song called When the Day Breaks You Down, which was a very recent recording, which would essentially be on a future album of mine. So there was stuff from 1980 and stuff from 2020. It had a lot of weird things.
Right. Yeah, Mark said, I guess it's pronounced lysogenic.
Lysogenic, yeah, it's hard lysogenic burnt offerings. It's hard to remember a word like that, but it's a good word.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it at the time.
It has like for some reason, almost like a glam rock feel to it,
I like that, yeah. I have been listening a lot lately to Lou Reed and Alice Cooper and David Bowie. So there's probably a glam component there.
I wanted to ask you, you put it up on YouTube, your little, I guess you call that live on TV performance, on General Hospital,
Yes,
um,
live, not really, but on
yeah,
TV for sure.
yeah, yeah, as live as they can get with the, daytime TV,
Yeah, mimed on General Hospital.
right? And were any of the people that you worked with surprised that you are in music, or that they kind of figured, oh,
Oh yeah, I mean that I was performing in front of the actors, and I'm a director on that show, so I work with the actors a lot and the crew. I mean, people know that I take time off to work on music, and they know that I'm a musician. Some of them have heard my music. Some of them for years have known about it, but a lot of people were very surprised. And of course, they didn't necessarily know what I would do or would sound like or could do. So it was a fun opportunity for people to see me in a different light on the set. Absolutely.
oh
And a
yeah,
great opportunity that my bosses gave me to perform on the show. And I had just written that song, 2 weeks before. And my producer, Paul, who was playing guitar in that miming, uh, helped me finish the song up so we could do it on TV. And his sister, Kira, it was Paul Russler on guitar, his sister, Kira Russler, on bass. She was in the band Black Flag, which is a Los Angeles
yeah,
punk rock band from the 80s. And then there was a guy named Natrix, who's a drummer, who the show hired for to mime the song. And he's a
right.
great drummer and does a lot of work in Los Angeles as well. So the three of us, I mean, the four of us, um, you know, pretended to be the band, and that was a lot of
Right.
fun.
Oh yeah, it looked like guys were having fun up there, and that'll probably also, you know, in a way, people are going to be like, well, if they don't know you, they'll say, hey, who's that? I like that. Then they can go and Google you and find, oh, he's been doing a lot of stuff. He just didn't show up that day to do it. He's been doing this music for decades.
Yeah, exactly. Throwing it out into the great unknown, the great ether. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely. It's probably the most extreme song that I've done in many many years, in the sense that it was very you know very streamlined, very short, very rock and roll. I mean, when I started writing the song, what I had in my mind was something that would be midway between Billy Idol and the Sisters of Mercy. I was definitely into a kind of a goth attitude. And then the show invited me to perform, and I was like, well, the closest thing I have to a mass appeal song would be this, because I was just performing in New Jersey, but I'm playing acoustic guitar versions of Phideaux the band songs, and that wouldn't really work on a soap opera. So yeah, I mean, it's a wide variety of music that I've been involved in lately, and that song, "Do What You Will," is probably at the most glam goth end of the spectrum of where I am at and going. So, but my music is definitely. I mean, the albums I've been working on in the last couple of years are not necessarily, son of Chupacabra or Doomsday. They're
Right.
not meant to be that pastoral.
Right.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid and listening to David Bowie, or even listening to the Beatles. Each of their albums was very different than the one that came before. So I enjoy having a different style that I can play with. But and I think going back to my archives and doing work, listening to my music from when I was a kid, inspired me to return to a little different quality of work,
Right. I, I personally think each album should be different than the previous one, because then, it's, um, there's no variety to it. It's like, oh, well, that album sounded like the one before and the one before. There's, you know, without naming names, there's a lot of bands out there nowadays that you can go and listen to it, and their new album sounds like their album that they put out 5 years ago. It's like there's
Ah,
no differences to it. I mean, it's quality, but there's just no imagination to it, and
yeah,
that's what I like when bands, they surprise you. They do something, take it something out of left field, or think outside of the box to give the fans. I mean, the ones that appreciate the music coming from the artist, not the style. They appreciate what you can create, as opposed to the albums itself. I think, I mean, that's the way I like it. When I get a new album from someone, I was like going, okay, I don't really want it to sound like what they put out. I want something new and fresh, something different, or maybe a different take on what they've done. That's I think that's what honestly, what progressive rock is all about. You're going to progress to the next level. Not. I mean, you look back, and see what you've done before, and then you use your knowledge, and then you go to create something a little different. And that's really what a lot of your music has. It's different. You go from fiendish to infernal. It's
yeah.
Fido, but it's not the same albums. They're different, each one
Well,
out.
yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I love creativity. I love creating music. I love melody. I mean, there are a lot of albums by bands that I was, followed a band and loved them, and then they would put an album out that I would hate, and like 2 years later, I'd listen to the album again. I'd be like, wow, this is a great album.
Right.
And I would, be initially so upset that a band didn't follow on X, Y, or Z style. I
Right.
also I also think I've been in a slump for the last decade because I have so much music that I have not released, and I've been very I feel regretful that I have not put out the music that I could have put out, and so that is my goal, is to right that wrong and try to hope that people will continue to listen to what I come up with, because I think because I don't try to make money off my music, it's easy for me to turn my back on my career, quote unquote, as a musician, and just be like, well, I don't need to release it. I don't need to put it out there. Someday maybe. But I think that is very disrespectful to the people who have followed my music, and so I'm really determined this year to fill in the blanks and get some stuff out. And yeah, I mean, music is for me a sacred journey. I love when I make music. I mean, I don't know if you've watched the Get Back Beatles
I haven't yet.
documentary.
I've been, because of the length that it is. I think it's like all 3 episodes, total of 8 hours. I think it is.
Yeah,
And I gotta get.
I was not sure that I was going to watch it, and then I decided to try it, and I watched it all in 2 days. And there's one moment in that where Paul McCartney is just sitting down, strumming his bass, and he starts to come up with the song "Get Back," and we know that song so well, and you see him starting to find it, and the beginning he's strumming the bass, and it doesn't sound like anything you've ever heard before, and then it starts to take the shape of Get Back, and then you see George start to like pay attention, and Ringo starts to pay attention, and John is not there at this point, and he's trying out all these melody ideas, and he finally comes up with the melody, and then he then he actually starts to sing the words "Get Back," and it's this incredible moment of the birth of a song. And for me, I recognize that birth of a song because on my albums, I always say songs discovered by Phideaux Xavier. I never say written by Phideaux Xavier, and that's probably a little silly and a little pretentious because certainly I'm gonna register them under my name, to get any royalties. But at the same time, I do feel that they come to me from the ether.
Yeah,
Sometimes songs appear and you recognize them and you try to shepherd them into the world. You're writing a song and you're like you're going on one direction. You're like, "Oh, this just doesn't sound right," and then someone helps you. They're like, "Oh, well, why don't you do that?" And then the song comes into focus. And I thought that was one of the amazing things about that Beatles retrospective film that Peter Jackson made.
every
Incredible film. So yeah,
everyone that everyone that I've heard that watch it have that um high praise for it, and it sounds like it's the closest thing we got to a time machine to see that. The only other way is to have an actual time machine to get there and be that little fly on the wall. So it's like it. I like those kind of documentaries where they go into the making of an album,
yeah,
um, because even though I don't know a lot of the musical instruments other than the obvious ones, and I don't know anything about recording techniques or whatever, but it's always interesting to watch when they show you, okay, this is how, when they're on the mixing board and they go back to an album and they isolate either the vocals or guitars, and it's just so amazing to hear that. So it's like it seems like if Get Back doesn't get any awards, then there's definitely something wrong with the music world.
yeah.
So
I mean, when you look back to the innocence of the 1960s when they were making music and creating all of this technology, and then you come to now where, I mean, the fact that I can make an album is incredible because and it's so easy and cheap compared to what it was like then. But yeah, music was a very special art in the days of Get Back, in the days of the 1960s. And nowadays, to keep track of every album that comes out would be almost impossible. There's 700 albums a day, whereas there were 7 albums a month of note in the 60s.
right, right. And with the exception of the progressive rock genre, I mean, everything else seems to be just like on what is it, a manufacturing line where it's like, add this, okay, we'll add this and add, I mean, no one's really being creative or creating it from scratch because all these sounds are now programmed into a giant library where people can access them, with their synthesizers and stuff like that. Whereas,
Absolutely.
even up until like, and that's why with the progressive, their bands, they're creating, even if they're like on different continents, they're still creating their parts and they put it together. You know, it's something that's being created as opposed to being manufactured, and that's what most of the pop music. I mean, there are some that slip through that actually surprise you, but for the most part, it's just all manufactured, and there's no soul to it. And
I do think that a lot of artists and producers have discovered that there are great formulas for how many hooks you should have, how long an introduction can be, when do you introduce, like a repetitive little phoneme that will bring people back. There's definitely it's kind of the equivalent of putting monosodium glutamate in food or sugar in food because it really excites the taste buds. And there are
Right.
pop songs that I listen to by, remixes of pop songs, or even, I remember there's a Lana Del Rey song that was just, it's perfect. And there's like 6 hooks on, or early Lady Gaga. I mean, all pop music is kind of manufactured with that. And there, so that formula gets repeated once someone hits upon a formula. And and to a similar degree, prog rock had its formula that people hit upon, but nowadays it's much more easy to quantify and sort of use artificial intelligence to figure it out. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a difference. Just in the 60s, there was manufactured music that was just meant to sell airtime.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah.
but creativity, I mean, creativity, and there are people in all the genres who try to subvert what you expect. And so I definitely love any music that will keep you on your toes. But I agree that definitely the music industry today would not be the music industry that I would have wished to be involved in as a small kid. When I was growing up, and rock music was really an outsider art form. It was not the top most. I mean, they were making a lot of money in the 60s, but it still felt holistic and a little magical, as opposed to now where music is just something we buy for 29 cents on Amazon.com to put on our phone and keep us
Right.
company.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, and then it goes back to, buying the CD. It's like you got that experience. I mean, that, to me, there's nothing like it. And it's the same for me with movies. Buy the movie. I can, yeah, granted, probably half the movies I own are on streaming sites. But the thing is this, is if they're gone off that site,
Yeah.
and I want to see it, I gotta wait, or I gotta buy the thing. And by buying the movie, I got it there. I can watch it whenever I want, and I don't have to worry about, oh, is it going to be there tomorrow?
Right.
So it's like, but then it's like it's a convenient, you got the convenience of, like you said, you put 5 albums on your little thumb drive. That's exactly what I do. I fill it up. I think it's like I got a 32 either megabyte or gigabyte thumb drive, and I just throw on a lot of stuff that it'll last me the whole month of listening in the car while I go to places.
Yeah.
But the convenience, because you're not going to bring a stack of 20 CDs in your car anymore.
No, I
Especially
mean,
when you
it's very convenient. MP3s and the whole digitization of music is very convenient. Unfortunately, you sacrifice a lot for that. But it's a different world. I mean, the way people sell music, the way people hear about music these days, the kids, social media. There was so much was different about the world when I was younger. So, you know,
yeah, it's like talking about the bringing a bunch of CDs. Uh, Chris from Echoland, the keyboardist, he was, he teaches music to students, and he was mentioning about the CDs, and they were asking, "What's a CD?" One said, "What's a CD?" And I'm like, going, "Oh, I think I would have just left the room if someone,
wow.
what's a
Yeah.
CD?" And I guess would have been the same thing as when people that are in were the CD generation, and didn't experience an LP, and someone says, "Oh, here's a record." Oh, what's a record? I guess you could put it in that context, but it's like, you know, people aren't talking about, and it's like we got so much access to information now. It's like it should be. I think it should be something that, even if they don't own it, they know. Okay, well, that was a way, our parents or, that generation listened to music.
Yeah. I don't know. I was watching something a little while ago, and they were talking about music and how, human beings have been making music and responding to music for, several tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. It's part of our earliest humanity, and that's pretty incredible. When you think about being a fan of music, there's a series of books that I like to read periodically that take place in the 1920s, and they were written in the 1920s. And I kind of think to myself, like, oh, I love these books, but I'm like, what would it have been like to be in a world before the Beatles? Like, to me,
Right.
music begins with the Beatles. That's just because that was the first music I heard when I was 3 years old,
Right.
and what was played in my house. And and it's taken me a while to even delve back into the 50s culture. Like, to me, everything began in the 60s, but nowadays I kind of enjoy looking back at other culture and previous stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. I remember looking at my parents' 78 RPMs.
Yeah, my parents, they both liked the Beatles, but they both stopped when Beatles kind of went into the psychedelic stuff.
Yeah.
It's just some, um, but it's like they, it's even though back then music wasn't as important that is to me as it is now. It was surrounding me, like on the AM radio. You heard the Beatles, the Beach Boys, and it's like those were like just I think part of our childhood, our DNA. Even if we, like for myself, that I didn't go into music, it's still in my DNA that if that I and it's like I like to learn more about things. So it's like and to know more why they created it, what, and that's why I'm gonna look forward to watching to that Get Back uh, series, so I can get into see what their mindset was going into that, because it's like this is an album that I think a lot of people take for granted in a way, you know,
Sure.
and then now you get to see how they created it, and that's why whenever I watch people, you know, I've watched friends bands in their little garages, play and create. There's a, I have a greater appreciation for the finished product, you know,
Absolutely.
and it's like, and then to get to see favorite bands live, that's even that's like you buy their CDs for years and years, um, and then to get to see them live, and it's like, you know, unfortunately, progressive rock bands can't tour as much as mainstream bands, but whenever you get a chance to see them, you know, we're so lucky that we got a lot of different festivals now. Um, I mean, we got Prague Stock, um, Lost Fest, and then that Cruise to the Edge, and then of course, Mark's little concert, house concert. I don't know how often he does that. I know he just recently did one with the band Discipline. So
Yeah, and he
you know,
has Oak coming up.
so it's like those I would love to go to like a house concert. I mean, it seems to be where I am now is like a frozen wasteland, you know, nothing. I mean, we got a venue down by the waterfront, but all it is either country, hip hop,
Mm.
and the occasional, I'll call them like a not a top 40, but the greatest hits band, they haven't put out an album in decades, and they're just rehashing the good old days, and just
Sure.
you got those, and then occasionally we'll get something interesting, but not to the degree of like any of the progressive rock bands or any, whether they're the smaller ones or to the, like King Crimson or, recently Genesis doing their final
Yeah.
thing. I mean, nothing. I think the closest to me is in that they came was Boston, and that's about a 6-hour drive. And it's like, I don't know if I could do, I couldn't do that, especially in my current situation. There's no way I can get, but we got Portland, which is a pretty decent sized city. I mean, not
Yeah.
like New York or Boston, but
Right.
it's got enough people there, and it's got a good, I think it's got a good theater there that a lot of bands do come to. But it's like not up my way. It's like it's just a
Yeah.
waste.
It's hard, it's hard to, for bands to tour. You got to you got to have that infrastructure as a band, and get the word out. But I mean, that the Beatles really figured out that idea of like stopping performing and just making films, sending their
Right.
films out. I mean, and luckily we can see bands on YouTube. I mean, that's been,
Oh yeah,
really
especially,
fun to examine a lot of stuff that I never saw before.
and then those lockdown videos, different bands and different. One of the most unusual ones that I saw was the drummer from Anthrax, and he just had a lot of his friends. They would they have, it looked like the Hollywood Squares, and the most unusual song from him, uh, Rhiannon from Fleetwood Mac. I'm
Nice.
like going, I, I, I thought I was like going, did I misread that title? I was like, and I was expecting some, thrash it out. So no, did it as
Yeah.
perfect, in tune with the original. Had a female singer for it too. So it's like, I mean, all those lockdown videos were just it was so fun. It was like those bands' way of saying, hey, we're still here.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Some
it's like even the Foo Fighters doing the Bee Gees was something I think had to have probably been born out of being forced to take time off and reevaluate, like, and just have fun and just enjoy music at the
yeah.
lowest level. Fripp and Toya doing
Oh
their
yeah, I
covers,
know.
fun
The, co-
stuff.
the cover of the week, some of them, it was just wow. I hope that it'd be good. Kind of interesting to pile them into like, you know, like a set.
Yeah, I mean they've definitely gotten some good press and suggestions for what they should do to further that
Oh
project.
yeah, yeah. And it's almost like everybody's looking forward to what are they going to do next? And they surprise. I think 90 something percent of the time they surprise people with what they do.
Oh yeah, I mean Black Sabbath, Britney Spears, just the craziest selections of stuff.
Yeah, and I think they
Just the
even did it
thought of Robert Fripp sitting and learning Britney Spears Toxic, it's like,
right.
wow, okay, it's fun.
Yeah, it's like, hey, they. I think they're all also at that time in their lives where what the hell, it's like, why not? It's like, what else am I going to do? Am I going to do the same old thing over and over again? And
Yeah.
you know, and they're fun. I wish more people, on their level would have done something like that. I mean, we did get a couple of live streaming concerts. One band, the Pineapple Thief, they did a live streaming concert, and they have already put it out on CD and Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like, that was the one thing I talked with people. I mentioned that something like those, the house concerts, or if you do it small, in studio thing to live stream it, and you'll touch all your fans all over the world that may not normally be able to make it to your concert. I think that's a new media that slowly people are touching upon. It's something. It's like, hey, you may do a couple dates, in the States and then maybe in Europe, but someone that's further away, like in Australia, that maybe can't afford that, have
No,
that.
it's for sure a good thing. I mean, of course, you need the technological, you've got to get the good mixing board. It has to,
Oh yeah,
elements to it that, go into making it. But it's a great way. I mean, even right now, being able to be live, chatting with people.
oh yeah. This Zoom thing is amazing.
Yeah,
Uh, Honestly, this is one of my things that if the lockdown didn't happen, I don't think I would have done this, because I don't think a lot of the people I've talked to would have been available.
sure.
You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, slowly people are getting back into their routines. I mean, some bands are touring, doing maybe a couple dates here and there. There's places that like that Prague stuff that they weren't allowing anyone that wasn't vaccinated to come in, which is good, because like I always say, it's like us as the audience have somewhat of a responsibility to keep you healthy, so you can come back and do your next show and again and again, and if someone comes in with some sort of a virus because they're being selfish because I want to see my favorite band, and you get the band sick, they have to reschedule some dates, that's becomes a inconvenience for the band.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I suppose it's also, I remember when I was a kid and we went to see Pink Floyd, and people were shooting off fireworks inside the stadium, and Roger Waters stopped the show. That was a legendary moment. Roger Waters cursing at the audience
Yeah,
for
it's like,
setting off fireworks. Like that's like throwing bottles at the Sex Pistols.
yeah, respect, if you paid good money to watch, come see your favorite band, treat them with that kind of a respect, because if you want to see them again, because I don't remember, I remember there was a couple of bands that basically they don't come back to a certain city because of how the audience acted towards it's like,
That's
so
that
it's like,
certainly is possible. Yeah.
yeah, so, but hey, I want to thank you honestly for taking the time out, to talk about your music. I mean, you got honestly from 2000, basically, you're counting Fiendish as basically the first album in discography, even though you guys on your Wikipedia mentions Friction, but that was like a decade earlier.
Correct. Yeah.
So
It's like,
you're basically saying Fiendish is the starting point, and from 2000, so it's 2003 to it's almost 2021, so it's almost 20 years, and you put out this amount of albums. That's a pretty good body of work right then and there. Even though if you feel like the past 10 years you haven't put anything out, but still, they the audience. I read a lot of different things when people mention Phideaux on Facebook, and it sounds like you have a good loyal fan base.
it's nice to hear.
And so it's like I think they can wait, and they'll be the ones that really know, like I was saying earlier about looking forward to music from Fido, not necessarily we want another Doomsday Afternoon or another Chupacabra. It's like those are your musical history. You got to add more to your history. You're not repeating the same thing over and over again, because it just gets dull. It's like, it's kind of like going on cruise control. It's kind of like,
Absolutely, but I thank you for that. I mean, I definitely, I don't believe it will be too much longer before the audience can hear from me again. But yeah, I'm grateful for anyone who wants to check out what I'm doing and come along for the ride. And there's always more music around the bend.
oh yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. So we'll and this thing will be up on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/prognaut. So I'll send you a copy. Watch
Thank
it
you.
and pass it along if you want to your band members.
Absolutely.
And thank you again for taking the time out.
No,
your
it's good
day.
to catch up with you after. Absolutely, it's great to see you in person.
Yeah, after a long 2009.
Yeah, you look the
Long
same.
Oh, thank you.
Younger.
I think it's what's been done to me. Health wise, I'm kind of going through my own little metamorphosis, where it's going towards the health side.
Well, that's good. Well, you look great, so I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, man.
Thank you.
And hope to talk to you soon. Maybe when some music comes out, come
I'll
back
keep you posted for sure.
and all right. Well, you have a good rest of your day, and thanks again.
Thank you. You too. See you later.
See ya.